We're ready.
What's up? Oh, hi. Welcome to the House Progressive Caucus. It is Tuesday, April 22nd. It's Earth Day. We, however, are not going to be discussing Earth Day much today. We are dedicating our caucus today to hearing from Free Her. First, we're going to do a round of introductions. Then I have some announcements from leadership. And then we'll go ahead and get started so that we have plenty of time for discussion. I'm Kate Logan. I represent the Chittenden 16 district, that's Central Old North End in downtown Burlington. I use she or they pronouns.
I'm Courtney Record, and I am with the House Clerk's Office.
Hi, my name is Gina Ossoff, she, her pronouns, and I'm the Free Her Vermont Campaign Director.
Brian Gina, State Representative for Chittenden 15, and that's the East District and a part of the Old North End, which is my party.
Jack Honsky, he, him. I'm the Progressive Party Director, providing support to our progressive elected officials.
Hello, I'm Will Anderson. I'm a new constituent of yours, actually, Logan in the Old North End. But I'm also a civil servant with the Finance Department involved in capital projects. So the issue of the correctional facility is something I'm involved in professionally, if not politically.
Great. So just a few announcements and then we'll get started. Target date for the vote on Proposition 3 is Thursday, May 1st. There's a public hearing today, immediately after this at 1 p.m. in room 11. Next Wednesday, April 30th. I don't have the time in my notes for some reason. There's an open public hearing on Veterans Affairs. Pretty much anything veterans want to bring to the hearing to discuss access to healthcare, housing, you name it. That'll be again Wednesday, April 30th. I believe that's at 3 p.m. Then this Friday, in room 11, from 1 to 3 p.m., there's a joint ed committee public hearing for students. There's an announcement that's gone out that we can share with our constituents to have students sign up to talk about their experience in our public school system. And then finally, there were some notes about decorum, but the speaker made those announcements from the floor today. So those are announcements. And now, Jana, please take it away.
Thank you. So once again, I am the Free Her Vermont Campaign Director, and we are essentially part of a broader movement to move our country away from the traditional use of incarceration towards preventative upstream solutions that really address the harms happening in community within the community without utilizing violence and further trauma, and more healing and accountability as the foundation here. So I always like to start our presentations with this quote by Angela Davis, because I feel like it really grounds into the energy we're trying to talk about when we envision this world without prisons. You know, there's a lot of fear when we talk about this vision for the future. And what we're really trying to do is to reframe the problem and make folks realize that our prisons only create an illusion of safety. There's not actual true safety here. And when we incarcerate a human, we're simply disappearing them and their issues without truly addressing the root causes that landed them in these cycles of incarceration. So just forever grateful for Angela for bringing humanity to the cause. So a little backstory for folks that may not be familiar with Free Her's work. We are a campaign of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. This is a nonprofit at the federal level that was founded by women who were incarcerated in federal prison together. It has truly been the greatest honor of my life to do the Free Her campaign for them and with them. When we talk about grassroots advocacy, I feel they envision what that means. You know, the National Council was started within the prison walls of Danbury, Connecticut, and they sat around and through the injustices, the trauma they faced, they decided they didn't want their sisters, their daughters, anyone. They didn't want anyone else to go through this terrible of a system. So they really started to operationalize, like, how do we start to tackle this audacious goal of ending incarceration? And Andrea James, far left, is our executive director. She was out first. And far right, Phyllis Hardy, may she rest in peace, she's our matriarch. She had the women in the prison crocheting and knitting, and they were selling those things and using that money to help Andrea travel across the country to talk about her mission. So the fact that that is the genesis story of the National Council makes me feel like I'm part of something extremely powerful and unique. So I just like to insert that because I know not a lot of Vermonters know these women, and they're really magical and amazing. And I feel blessed that I found them and work for them. So yes, maybe also let me just preface, once everyone was out of prison, and we're talking some of these women served 29 years, 20 years, 17 years. I think between our leadership team, they served over 100 years in prison together. And they went around the country and did these listening tours and really listened to women and their families and figured out, like, what did you need instead of prisons? And, you know, even if it was prisons, they gave them space to say that, but no one in these meetings said they needed prisons. They all said they needed their basic needs met. They needed violence prevention. They needed supportive housing, like the true social determinants of health that meet our needs. So then came the National Council. I will share this slide. I don't think we have time for a video, but I do encourage folks to check this out just so you can put some faces to the national folks and some of our allies across the country. And once again, to reiterate, prison abolition is a queer Black woman-led movement. So when we say, let's listen to Black women, this is what they're saying. Okay. And now looking at Free Her Vermont. So we essentially function as a microcosm of the Greater National Council. And something very beautiful about Free Her Vermont is I'm the only paid staff. So this is almost 100% people powered. This is not a special interest coming into our state trying to push a narrative. This is me being a shepherd and steward for a movement that other Vermonters want. And something to mention, I'm a born and raised Vermonter myself, so this is my interest as well. So yes, I make decisions alongside my volunteers. There's no hierarchy, we build together. So this is the will of a lot of folks' constituents. So the three major buckets of our work is advocacy, like being here today, talking with, the Progressive Caucus or other committees that want to hear, alternative narratives around harm and incarceration. And something that feels important to us when we testify is we bring formerly incarcerated people, because many folks, specifically in the State House, make decisions around incarceration and currently incarcerated people without hearing directly from them. And it's important to center people in decisions that affect their lives. So we try to help bring their voices forward. Another very important part of our programming is reimagining communities. Think back to like the Black Panther Party's programming that really met needs and helped their communities survive. So we have a basic guaranteed income where right now we can afford to give 2 formerly incarcerated women $500 a month, no strings attached, just to help ease that transition back into the community. And we also have a canteen fund, which we fundraise directly in the community, and folks will deposit onto the commissary accounts of incarcerated people. And I'm sure a lot of folks, there's been more dialogue this session around some of the costs associated with being in prison. Like, they have to pay for phone calls, envelopes, their iPads. Being in relationship with your support system on the outside costs money. and buying nutritious food, buying new shoes. Like we had a woman, she's struggling with lupus and she's having flares and needed some money for shoes. So we're just trying to meet their basic needs in there. And then also our volunteer base is called People Not Prisons. And through that, we have a few action teams that are bottom lined by our volunteer organizers. So that's things like InReach, where we write directly with people in the prison. We help them with reentry planning or reaching out to other advocacy groups to help set up supports. Other things we do is we call it our zine team. We make zines and other educational materials. We also do presentations at local colleges and universities and high schools. And then we have our pressure team that plans direct actions and other events to really spread awareness about the prison plans. And then lastly, participatory defense, where we support people as they navigate their legal process. And I'm very proud to say we have helped 4 people so far, and they all have avoided prison time. So these programs, in my opinion, I feel like are having an impact in our community. And last but not least, shifting narratives. So like communicating with legislators, talking to community members about what harms are not captured by the prison system, what kind of issues and injustices happen within it. You know, not a lot of people have a clear understanding of how prisons work and what kind of abuses are faced behind the walls. So we try to just shed some light and insert some humanity into these conversations. Okay, so framing the prison problem. For folks who do not know, our state is currently planning to build new prisons, starting with a women's prison that has had a steadily increasing price tag. I think when I began organizing around this in 2023, 2022, it was projected to cost 50 million, and now we're up to 97 million. And I predict this will continue to increase. And an important note here is that, well, these numbers are steadily increasing as, you know, as the tension is ramping up, but usually we have around 150 people incarcerated in our Vermont women's prison, usually around half of whom are only detained and not sentenced. So these are just like some of the numbers that are starting to cause alarm for us, just the huge price tags for such a small population. And we also feel like we have an opportunity here to start thinking outside the box, which we can get into that conversation later. Okay. So where we are in the process, I'm sure legislators are more familiar with other folks I talked to about this. So I will just highlight that these Essex sites, you know, we not only predict will be harmful for the community, but there's some environmental aspects that just have us a bit concerned. Namely that they're near wildlife corridors, they are near rare, threatened, and endangered animals and species, there's some trailheads, and just overall, it's a robust natural site for Essex residents. They use it a lot for a surplus of like winter activities and things of that sort. So we're just concerned also about it seems, I'm not sure if this we'll be able to move forward without a more significant environmental risk report or something of that sort, but just some things we also wanted to flag. And depending on what committee you're in, you may know more about these numbers, but we think this is helpful just to provide some context about what Vermont's carceral system even looks like. So as you can see, the Vermont Department of Corrections budget is up to over $230 million for FY26. And we only have around 1,400 people in our state prison. And this includes around 150 who are incarcerated down in Mississippi. And yeah, we
Hold on
just,
a second.
oh yeah, go
I
ahead.
just want to do a calculation.
For how much that is per person.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can move on now.
Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to get the number right.
What is the number?
That's $158,402.20 per person.
And you know, the numbers speak. It's our priorities are translated through budget allocations and things of that sort. So we're saying it's worth community dollars to spend 150,000 just to warehouse humans. We know they're not getting as much treatment as they need, and that's not. I love the contracted partners in the prison. I think they do amazing jobs. I just don't think they have the resources they need to expand their reach. And they've also explained, their services end in the prison walls. They're not able to extend it to folks re-entering. And even there are some statutes that prevent them from providing services for detainees. So all this to say, we're putting $150,000 into just warehousing humans when we could be paying for treatment, supportive housing, case management. And I know these things aren't easy, and that's why prison abolition is difficult for people, because it really requires us to be brave and to care about folks that have caused some significant harm in our community. But yeah, we don't have to get into the philosophical aspect now. We can talk about that later, but it is, how do we want folks to come back to us is a very important question to be asked here. So some other important characteristics of Vermont's carceral state is that we are a unified system, meaning we do not have county jails. We only have prisons, which means folks who are detained, sentenced, held for ICE, or held for transfer to federal prison, they're all within the same facilities. We don't have clemency, we only have pardons, which folks are mostly only eligible for 10 years after completion of sentence. So there's not really that second look legislation or opportunities for folks that have spent decades in prison to show us they've changed, to show us they have made steps to be accountable and, maybe able to be let out on parole. So just some things I would like to highlight about our system as well.
I also wanted to point out that your last statistic there, that 85% of the residents of CRCF are there due to technical violations.
No, wait, was that on that
Yeah.
slide?
Yeah, that's
No, you didn't see that. Okay.
The number may not be exactly correct, but I think the point I want to highlight the point, which is that there's a massive amount of people being incarcerated in Vermont who are there due to probation violations. And when you hear their stories, and what it is, it's things like a mom missing an appointment because her kid was sick, or like someone not having enough money to do something, it's these little technical things, and it'll just throw people back in. It disrupts it has an economic cost to them and their families, but then the taxpayers are covering that. So
Yeah.
that was me.
No, I appreciate that. And I will give credit that there has been improvements around this, but there are still folks that are being caught up in the nitpicking of this system, like what you're saying.
Yeah.
If they're not back by curfew, if there's alcohol in their residence, like things that should not be worthy of a return to prison, folks are getting caught up in. But I think the Department of Corrections has made some significant efforts here. I'm not sure where those numbers stand.
It'd be nice to get an update.
Yeah,
We can let them know we're paying attention.
yeah.
The last I saw, it was under 50%, which is an improvement, but I could be.
Yeah, I don't know if that's overall recidivism rates or recidivism due to these furlough technicalities.
Yeah.
But okay, yeah. Good question for legislators to probe. So, we don't expect everyone to leave this conversation believing that moving away from prisons is the right path forward. All we're hoping for today is to have like an honest dialogue about where things are at in our state. And, even if we don't agree on the necessity of prisons in society, I hope we can agree that this is a fiscally irresponsible decision to be making in this moment. So looking at cost figures for incarceration, it costs a baseline $95,000 per year to incarcerate one person. And this doesn't include folks who are pregnant, folks who have chronic illness, who are aging and elderly, which Vermont has a significant elderly population in our prisons. And then estimates from the ACLU, they were digging into these secure beds that the Department of Corrections was talking about. And my understanding is that these secure beds are more like hospital style beds for the folks that are coming into our prisons significantly ill. The ACLU estimated that they would cost at least 800,000 per bed. So when we move on from the women's prison, they believe once we finish the women's and men's prisons, this will be at least $500 million. And we just had recent articles about our state having to condense and close so many hospitals around the state. Yet we have, money to put basically hospital grade beds within prisons. It just feels like we're creating this dangerous situation where care is becoming condensed behind the walls of prisons. And I just want to raise a red flag there that it's immoral to fill the gaps in community care with prisons. And all it will do is drastically expand the pathways into prison. And we're going to see a lot more Vermonters incarcerated. Another important figure, and this is actually back from COVID-19 2020. But a caveat here is I was just talking to the commissioner at our last stakeholder meeting, and they are not able to afford Wi-Fi. And I was asked why they couldn't with a budget of $230 million. And they said that each line item is very specifically allocated. But then in the same setting, I learned that they had to spend another additional $20 million to address emergency staffing shortages. So I don't know if this is an additional 20 million on top of this 20 million, or if that's something that's been happening each year, that we're seeing an increased amount go to staffing. But I think that's another important question for legislators. And I think an important pattern for us just to be noticing that Vermonters do not want to be working in corrections anymore. They want to be doing more life-affirming work. That's at least what we've been seeing from the high turnover issues and the staffing crisis. And there's more information about that from Joint Justice Oversight over the summer. There was a lot of testimony from Department of Corrections staff workers. Okay. And on the right, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with some of these cost figures for crises around our community. But, when we're talking about spending $500 million on prisons while our state is facing catastrophic flooding, disrepair in our school on a massive scale, folks being kicked out of emergency motels every spring and fall, Vermont, we're supposed to be a state that prides ourselves on taking care of the most vulnerable among us. And I feel with this prison question, we're going to have to really decide where our morals stand. And it can't just be, we're going to have to choose what we decide to invest in. Okay. Thank you for bearing with me, everyone. I know it's a lot of information, but this part of the presentation, I like to just share some statistics that humanize the folks within our prison system. So if you remember, we're talking about a prison population of around 1,400 people. And if you look at this data from the Department of Corrections population data, you can see that significant portions of our prison population are either just simply detained, struggling with substance use, or struggling with mental health. There's a very clear trauma to prison pipeline that not a lot of people want to talk about. And this is what happens when there's not resources available in a community. And we just, put everything behind the wall. And this is something we've seen not only in Vermont, but across the country, is this almost repackaging of incarceration as care. And that folks shouldn't be receiving records to have access to care or substance use or mental health for the first time. Especially as Vermonters, I feel we should be looking at where the gaps are in community care and start building from there. And I feel we would see significant decreases in our prison population just by building a more robust coordinated system of care. And we'll talk about the bill that Representative Brian Chena introduced that really gives us a roadmap in a little bit. But yes, to further humanize the folks within our prison, just one of the statistics that stands out to me every time is that 95% of the people in Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility have experienced violence and abuse. And once again, when we talk about like clear trauma to prison pipelines, like these are not people that woke up one day and decided they wanted to be violent or commit harm. These are people that have been failed time and time again, most often dating back to childhood. And when we talk about trauma-informed approaches, I don't think there's enough conversation about how trauma can change people's brain chemistry and how the resources and treatment options available in prisons don't really address the true depth and scope of what trauma can do to a person's brain and behaviors. And we don't talk enough about how the prison system replicates intimate partner violence. So when we talk about being trauma-informed, how is someone supposed to heal if their physical environment replicates the situation that caused them trauma? Another important statistic here is that Black Vermonters comprise 11.7% of our prison population, yet only 1.5% of Vermont's overall population. So when we talk about prisons being tools of racialized control and oppression, this statistic really shows what we're talking about. And that racialized punishment gets worse behind the walls. We see at least 26% of people that are going to segregation and ADSEG are Black, Brown, Indigenous. So ADSEG is essentially COs have more discretion around who they determine may be a threat. And based on racial bias, a lot of Black and Brown folks end up in ADSEG. And this is in our zine. I can send along if folks are interested.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Another important piece here is 88% of people in our prisons have a chronic illness. When we talk about, people being dangerous to our community, there are people in our prisons that have cancer. I don't think prison is the appropriate place for people that are they're near the end of their life. And then obviously a lot of children are the hidden victims of incarceration in our state. And you'll see further how we're replicating these systems of incarceration by not giving children the support they need when their parents are in prison. And just the last stat I like to leave people with, because I feel like it helps open up the brain to possibilities besides the prison. So in our current women's prison, per the Department of Corrections data from May 2024, only 13 people have 5 years left until their minimum release date. Meaning we only have around a dozen people that are currently in our women's prison that will experience the new women's prison. Like granted, people will commit another transgression and become incarcerated again, but we're talking about people who are physically in there. There are only 13 people with more than 5 years left. So one, this shows us, okay, these are manageable numbers to really experiment with an alternative here. 13 people is not enough to create a crime panic or a crime scare. Let's build a facility that's rooted in, cognitive behavioral therapy or contingency management. Some of the great ideas radical social workers have for addressing these harms in our community. I just feel, 13 people that may need longer term support. And then we build out the inpatient facilities, the mental health, everything else in community that's needed. We can really decrease our dependence on prisons in this moment. And once again, I know this is not, I know I'm not asking something easy. I know I'm asking us to be brave, but change has to come at some point. And I feel the prison system has had decades and decades to experiment, and we haven't been seeing solutions. So it's time for others to have a chance to experiment. So getting back to how children are the hidden victims of incarceration. Once again, these are a bit aged, but I still think it's important for the conversation. UVM's Department of Sociology went into the prison in 2014 and found that out of our incarcerated population, nearly 40% of them had a parent incarcerated during their youth. So we are just replicating systems of incarceration here. And looking further, around 15% were homeless during their youth, and 23% were in foster care. And this is not just Vermont. If you look at California's prison statistics, 70% of California's prison system is made up of kids who aged out of the foster care system. So once again, when we talk about people in prison, these are people we have failed time and time again, dating back to childhood. And I just have to stress that, because these are not just, dangerous people that have decided to just wake up. This is organized abandonment by our community. So yes, it's time for abolitionist alternatives. I'll call him a historian. One of our core organizers went through the archives of Vermont history and found that in 1974, CRCF was similarly proposed to our community as this new prison is being proposed as a community model.
And they built it like that?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
wild.
It wasn't supposed to have barbed wire. It was supposed to be single cells. It was supposed to be a lot of folks going into the community to receive services, people coming into the prison to, help folks. And within 5 years, we saw much of that model fall apart. And we're just concerned that this will happen again. And this, once again, citing from examples across the country, specifically in Illinois, and there's another state, I'm not remembering where, but Department of Corrections have made similar promises around robust programming just for these things not to be delivered on. And we're concerned just at this price tag, we can't afford for these programs to not be delivered on. Okay, so just to give more ideas for alternatives, I'm going to cite a few that exist in community already. But when we talk about alternative systems to incarceration, these are some of the key components that we feel would need to be central. One, the prison system assumes that rehabilitation can happen in isolation, and that's something a lot of us know isn't true. Rehabilitation happens in connection, happens in love, happens when you feel accountable to people you have a relationship with. It also centers the victims of harm. A lot of folks worry about what this means for victims when we talk about prison abolition, but truly their needs and their wishes will be centered in this. Folks that have navigated the criminal legal system for sexual assault know firsthand how harmful this system can be. It can force you to dredge up the most vulnerable experiences you've been through just to have a prosecutor on the other side trying to poke holes in your argument. I don't think that system truly centers victims as well. And then another important part about abolition that I want to pull out is that it's deeper than just saying I'm sorry and moving on. We get to the root, how do we transform the condition that even allowed for that harm to occur in the first place? Something we like to talk about, it's easy to call people monsters, but it's not easy to take a step back and think about how we contributed to the behavior of individuals, from the jokes we allow, from the little behaviors we let slide. We all have a responsibility to change the culture of our communities. How am I doing on time? Okay, we're doing okay? Okay, okay.
We have to spend much 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, let me speed through. But I just want to cite this because, folks, when they're like, alternatives, what does that look like? That sounds complicated. It's not as complicated as we think. And Vermont actually already has existing alternatives. So I'm sure folks are familiar with the examples on my screen, but Pathways has multiple programs, one of which is their Housing First, which, as you can see, is significantly more fiscally responsible. It comes in at a price tag of $53 daily compared to prisons being $260. And as you can see, 81% of their program participants have not returned to long-term incarceration, which is better outcome than we're seeing with the traditional system. And also, Jenna's promise, if folks have time for a field trip, I encourage you to go. I left Jen's Promise with tears in my eyes. That place is truly inspirational, and they understand that reentry is holistic. It has to engage the whole of a person. So they do job preparation, family reunification, exercise, Reiki. They have transitional housing. It's a beautiful place. And if we could have a Jenna's Promise in each county, I just feel our prison population would shrink on its own. So just two things I want to pull out. And another question that legislators can ask the DOC is how many people in CRCF are held for lack of approved housing? Because right there, we know a lot of folks are held in the prison because they do not have a place to stay. So supportive housing. And just to lift up our sisters on the inside, that top quote, I couldn't have said it better myself, is from one of our incarcerated Vermonters in CRCF. She says instead of prisons, we should have long-term residential places that have routine and discipline, but not demands and bars, to have mentors, not correctional officers. Jail is jail. Most of us are addicts who need different types of support rather than prison. Even other heinous crime can use supports that fit those needs rather than bars. And for the sake of time, just to uplift our sisters and siblings on the inside, here are some more responses to, this is the question. We sent in a survey asking just like about experiences in the prison, alternative ideas they have. And these are just a few that, stuck out to us. A lot of folks just need support. They just need connection and they don't have that. So if we could create that community, that would just be beautiful and would interrupt so many behaviors that lead to incarceration. Okay. And just a plug, please support H456 introduced by the magnificent Representative Brian Sheena. It really gives us a beautiful blueprint for how to start moving away from incarceration and name some trusted nonprofits and advocacy groups that are already doing this work to receive funding to expand their services, while also adding in language for a prison moratorium so we can just pause prison construction and one, study alternatives, and two, think of a better path forward. And if folks are like, oh, maybe H456 isn't what I want to do, I put up some other ideas for legislation you could support, what I've identified as needs. We need pathways out of prison if folks can help do that. I know on the Senate side, they've been working on that. We also need true trauma-informed alternatives. We need inpatient treatment centers so prisons are not left filling that gap. So, in your conversations, in your committees, if you can just raise these, and also if you can bring in formerly incarcerated people to hear directly from them and what they need, that would be very supportive. Okay, and it's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, and we have time for a couple questions.
Okay.
I mean, I think what I would really love to see is, and then I realized that this would require a lot of technical support, and resources. But I think this is something that we should be pushing for, despite the fact that it has lost a little bit of the movement energy behind it. I think we can reinvigorate that energy, especially right now, as we're seeing the carceral state being really built out at the federal level. Yeah. But I think it would be interesting for people to understand, especially legislators, to have a really tangible understanding of what it costs, what kind of resources are needed in our communities, like how many people need supportive housing for because they're experiencing mental health issues, how many, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I think that is one of the things that makes it really hard for people to grasp. But I do think that we're headed in the right direction right now. Like, we've been talking about the motel program. even the governor now is like saying stuff like, we need more treatment beds, we need more supportive housing, he's not putting any money in the budget for that, but he's saying the right words. Like people are hearing those words actually said out loud by the governor. And so I do feel like this is a good time for us to be thinking about like, okay, you hate the motel program. Okay, this is what this could look like in our community. And this is how much it would cost. And no matter, it's gonna cost a lot, but it's gonna cost less than building new prisons.
And it will pay back into our
Yeah,
community
exactly.
over time.
It saves money.
We're gonna have healthy, oh yeah, and to share.
I was just gonna give an example, like in the healthcare committee right now, we're looking at realigning the delivery and finance of the healthcare system as a whole. And we're looking at where money has been spent in massive amounts and how to reallocate it. For example, UVM Medical Center has sent hundreds of $millions out of state to the New York hospitals to prop them up in their network at our expense. And now we're clawing back that money and reinvesting it into primary care, into holding up Blue Cross Blue Shield Vermont and other investments. What would happen if we took the $40 million a year from WellPath, invested it in our healthcare system, and just provided healthcare from universal primary care, from like primary care offices in the areas and designated agencies and we've been proposing that for years and saying, let's experiment by creating a fund as part of reinvestment. And they just come up with excuse after excuse, like, well, where would they do telehealth? Build a room for telehealth. Like, it's not that expensive, and so like, that's one example of how in salvaging the healthcare system, we could improve delivery of healthcare to justice-involved individuals wherever they are, whether that be in a facility or out. And so I am going to propose, when we're working on the bill, that we include that. It's something to look at as we're studying the realignment. But there's many examples like that. Like the Human Services Committee allowed me to present this bill. And as I presented it, many of our ideas are happening. So they have been listening to us, even though they're not passing our bill, and little pieces are happening. But what was clear is there's some major gaps still around residential facilities for people who need like high level care of supportive housing, like you were saying. And when you talk to the chronically unhoused, a lot of them say what they need is housing with a lot of allowance. And then there's a small percentage who just want to be nomads and just need some freedom and space to live. But that's a very small percentage. Most of them are like begging for just a place to be. And for what it's worth, like in our feeding people, a lot of them, almost all of them have been incarcerated who are currently unhoused, like in outside. They are like, one guy the other day told me that he decided he wants to get clean. So the first step is he got on methadone. So he's still using psychostimulants and methadone, but he's getting better. And then he got arrested and for something, and he was incarcerated for a week. And during that week, they took him off the methadone without any support. So he went through withdrawal, even though the hub and spoke had arranged treatment and even sent the medication to the facility.
Oh my gosh.
Then this is the kind of stuff, like, it's like, what good does that do to the taxpayer when everyone else in the system does the right thing, but then corrections does something wrong? And so like, I just use that as an example, another example of like, we can reinvest in other kinds of, like, I think of it as like deferred sentencing. Like if you commit harm and you were convicted of a crime, that maybe we say you have a choice. You can choose to go to this secure residential facility, or maybe it's not even secure, but you go to a residential facility and you do the 2-year treatment and then you get out. Or if you refuse, then you go to a carceral facility. And I bet if we started experimenting with that over 10 years, we'd find that very few people go to a carceral facility and we could just start shutting them down. And those 13 women, we could build a high security apartment building and keep them in very humble 1-bedroom or studios.
We have models.
Yeah, there's plenty, like the secure residential recovery facility. I'll stop there because it's your presentation, but we work together on this stuff, so I get excited.
Yeah. No, but yeah, I do think we have an opening right now, especially because of the motel program and the the struggle that we're having with chronic homelessness right now. People want to address it, but we all recognize that, you know, just giving somebody a motel room is not, it's not the solution. And then when we talk with providers who are doing coordinated entry and trying to do housing navigation with folks who have been living outside or in the motels, they're saying that the needs of the people that they're working with are just so significant that putting them in like rental housing almost ensures
Yeah,
that they'll be outside
Yeah,
in no time, back in the motels. What they need is treatment, they need, and, you know, residential supportive housing for people with mental health issues.
Mhm.
That isn't, you know, a state hospital.
yes, yes, thanks.
So,
overly restrictive in any way, like they
Right.
need freedom.
yeah. And restorative justice practices.
Yeah.
And embedded in all that. So I do think that like as hard, like as it has been to sow the seeds for these ideas, because we are in a punitive society, obviously. I think people are starting to get the message.
Yeah.
And
Starting.
yeah, starting.
I feel like, you know, the way society is so unsustainable that folks will hopefully be open to change in whatever way it looks, because the way we're doing things is just, it's not working.
No, it isn't. I really appreciate you being here today. Yeah, and I think hopefully people will get really mad too about how much private prisons cost and start to realize that this is like a profit making.
And even the public prisons, like the Department of Corrections gets kickbacks from commissary calls, things of that sort. All prisons are for profit, even
Yeah.
state ones.
Yeah,
It is ridiculous, like knowing people who are currently incarcerated, how they're charged for things. Like
yeah,
one of them reached out to me to create an email account so we can email, and the company charged me twice. It made me pay a second time. So now they have $20 credit, and then I send him messages, but he can't even access them because he doesn't have money, and there's no way internally in that system for me to pay for him to read my messages. So it's this complex mess. And then every time they move him, he has to do some change. And so it's like I wasted $20 on this thing that can't even be used. And like they charge like 25 cents an email,
yeah.
17 cents for an
And
envelope.
these are all private vendors.
Yeah, it's all, and they do an RFP and they bid on it.
Yeah.
But I don't know that process, but we don't control those prices. So essentially, we've created a system where private companies are benefiting off of the crime in Vermont,
Oh, yeah.
including WellPath, which does pay local providers as contractors, why are we paying a middle person company with a high administration costs with a history of failing who's not providing care?
Yeah.
When we could just, it seems like a no-brainer to me. Why would we not reinvest that money into the local system of care that's failing and just find a way to integrate for just say that wherever a person is, they get care.
Yeah.
And we figure out how we do that. And it can be that there's some providers could visit the facilities, but with telehealth, it revolutionizes our ability. And the fact that they say there's no room we can use is ridiculous when they want to build like increased capacity for detention, or whatever. So
But I do think like the average person who doesn't have a strong personal connection to the criminal justice system needs to be able to like see and like feel what this will look like. Like, I think it's time to just like help people envision what this is gonna look like, because those are most of the questions that like constituents will ask me, especially because I'm a progressive. They automatically assume,
Yeah.
exactly,
You want to get rid of everything.
and they're not wrong. And so that's like the thing that they'll say, like, I like progressives, but blah, blah, blah.
but you defunded the police.
Yeah, so what are you gonna do? Yeah, and so like people really, I think that we know that the current situation, like what we're doing now isn't working. But people have a really hard time imagining what the alternative is gonna look like. Especially if they haven't experienced the criminal justice system themselves, or they have, and the person that they're thinking of, that they're fine with
how
Yeah.
things went for that person.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is we need to make a short, Afrofuturist film this summer about
Yes.
about formerly incarcerated women who fall through a rift in space-time and end up in a dimension where humanity has created an alternative and they're shocked at the difference.
Yeah. But then-
It would be fun to make this. We should do this this summer.
It's all around the state. So close to that. But like, I'm down.
No, that's a great point, like, we've been thinking about some kind of needs assessment.
Yeah.
Like going into the
Yeah.
prison, figuring out X needs
Yeah.
a rehab bed for this, yeah, I
And
think
you
that's
have
great.
partners like Pathways, for example,
Yeah.
can help you sort of like pencil it out.
Yeah.
Like, what would this alternative, what could these alternatives look like?
Yeah.
Well, they're already DOC already contracts with Pathways and they have increased funding for that as we've advocated. And just like a lot, when I went through the list of our bill with Human Services, I was thanking them for doing a lot of these things that we've been asking, but we can do more.
Yeah.
We can do a lot more.
Yeah. But we'll, it's just a minute.
Time,
The
yeah.
hour, I have a little bit of time before my committee starts, but I know you.
I know.
You get going, so thanks so much for being here, Dana.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.